You know, this past October, MTV finally brought some quality programming back to their airwaves. That's right, they brought back Beavis and Butt-Head after a 14-year hiatus. Now, calm down, there's no new games in the works that I'm aware of, but back during the show's original run, there were games aplenty.
A little history. Beavis and Butt-Head was created by Mike Judge in 1992 for the animated short Frog Baseball, which appeared on MTV's classic program of animated weirdness, Liquid Television. It was promptly picked up by MTV for a full season of half-hour episodes.
Remember this? It's the article my cousin wrote about media influencing kids. I talked about it during the Mortal Kombat episode. The same article also mentions Beavis and Butt-Head and what a horrible influence parents thought they were at the time. Well, apparently the combination of these two socially toxic tastes, Beavis and Butt-Head and video games, were just too much for Viacom and their new game publishing arm, Viacom New Media, to pass up. So, in 1994, Beavis and Butt-Head graced the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on where you live. And these, of course, are our two games for this episode.
Viacom New Media isn't a fondly remembered publisher, and with good reason. They almost exclusively published shitty games based on shows that ran on their networks. This primarily meant Nickelodeon games that would burn innumerable kids who were fans of shows like Guts, Rocko's Modern Life, and Are You Afraid of the Dark?
In fact, I owned that Are You Afraid of the Dark game. It came with the first PC my family ever bought. And I couldn't even get the thing to fucking run. It came with the PC and I couldn't get it to run. But I digress. Viacom New Media only lasted for about 5 years, and with good reason. The games they made were almost exclusively awful, and sorry to say it, but these aren't exactly the exception to the rule. Well, they were both published by Viacom, but they were developed by separate teams. The Super Nintendo version was developed by Real Time Associates. Meanwhile, the Genesis version was developed by Radical Entertainment. And yes, that is the same Radical Entertainment that was recently responsible for the prototype on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360.
Whoa, war!
Yeah.
Let's start with this. Neither game is very good, and they both follow a similar story. Beavis and Butt-Head hear that shock rockers Gwar are coming to Highland. In the Super Nintendo version, the duo decide they'll be able to get in if they do a bunch of cool stuff. I'm not exactly sure what they think is cool about walking to the right through 5 boring levels and engaging in really poorly thought out set pieces, but I guess it qualifies because they do eventually get to see Gwar. The Genesis version sees the duo somehow get enough money to buy tickets. One can only assume they stole it or scammed it off Stuart. But the tickets are promptly snatched up by Mr. Anderson's dog, who eats them and then vomits them up right in front of the old man's riding lawnmower, which cuts them up and scatters them all across town, leaving Beavis and Butt-Head to go find all the pieces before the concert starts.
Look, I can't blame Gwar for taking the money to appear in these games, but damn, man, Gwar is better than this. Although their appearances do lend some credibility to the games. Now, the Genesis version is a little more interesting due to the ticket collecting mechanic, which adds some adventure game elements. However, those adventure game elements are somewhat poorly implemented, which also says something about the game's quality.
First of all, both games let you choose your level from the beginning, but in the SNES version, there's no reason to do one over another. You just have to play all 4 before going to the Gwar concert. The Genesis game, on the other hand, involves lots of searching for key items and backtracking to get the ticket pieces. Both games have their problems, but oddly enough, said problems seem unique to each version.
We've already covered 2 of them. Bland level design on the SNES, and backtracking on the Genesis. Now, backtracking isn't something that I automatically hate on principle, but when there's too much of it, or it becomes a matter of not knowing where to go or what I'm supposed to do next, that's when I take umbrage with it.
The Sega game relies way too much on trial and error. For example, you can see here that I'm throwing the snake I got at the pet shop at the army recruiter. If you don't do that before you grab the file on the desk, you die instantly.
But that's not a patch on the SNES version. That game has more than its fair share of problems. We've already talked about the bland level design, but that feeds into the overall gameplay experience. I mean, practically all you do is walk to the right. You can barely call it a platformer because there's no platforms. You just walk. It's a walker. 2D walker. Second only to that, and by a very narrow margin, is, you guessed it, the controls. Slippery movement, delayed input, everything that can be wrong with a 2D platformer is wrong with these controls. At least they included that B jumps and Y attacks.
And speaking of attacks, let's address the combat here. Each version goes to a different extreme. In the SNES game, the combat is typically too easy. You find these, ping pong ball guns? Whatever they are, they take out pretty much everything in one hit. In the Genesis version, everything takes about 1,000 hits, and the biggest problem is that the best weapon, the dart machine gun, knocks enemies off screen before they die. So you have to keep waiting for them to get closer to you, but not too close, lest they hit you. It's shit.
Oh, and how could I forget that great bastion of days gone by, the password system. Neither game allows for continues, but both implement a password system. A fucking password system! It was 1990 goddamn 4. Super Mario World came out 3 years earlier and had a battery. And you know what? I wouldn't even mind. I wouldn't mind if I didn't have to put them in every time I lost all my fucking lives, or if they weren't so goddamn complex. But I do, and they are.
Look at this fucking train wreck. This is the Genesis version's password screen. Nothing to frustrate the hell out of you like 2 full alphabets, plus numbers, and symbols. I hope your handwriting was impeccable when you were 12, lest you confuse a 1 with an L or a 0 with an O. Not that this garbage is any better. This is the SNES password screen, and aside from the obnoxious audio, it's frustrating as all get out to keep track of the difference between ha and heh, to say nothing of woo and whoa.
Whoa.
Oh, and the best part, you want to know the absolute best part? The SNES password system keeps track of how many lives you have and how much health you have, and it only gives you a password at the end of a level, so I hope you didn't lose 2 out of your 3 lives on the first stage. Anyways, let's talk about something less unpleasant for a moment. The graphics.
These games are nothing if not good looking. They both really capture Mike Judge's style and the look of the show. Oddly enough, as with Aladdin, somehow the Genesis game manages to look better. In this case though, it's at a cost. The sprites are huge and really detailed, but it means that Beavis and Butt-Head take up a ton of real estate on the screen, making it hard to react to obstacles and enemies. This makes it doubly hard if you're playing with 2 players, because if one of you dies, you both die. At least this is obvious in the SNES game where you share a life bar, but in the Genesis one you have separate life bars. What the fuck?
The graphics on the SNES game are also good, but not as good as on the Genesis game, which is weird. At that time, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that any game that came out for both systems would automatically look and sound better on the Super Nintendo. But this one doesn't. I mean, in the case of Aladdin, it was because the team that did the Genesis game really went above and beyond and strived to make a great looking game that to this day is still possibly the best looking game on the entire console. In this case, it's just because the team that did the SNES game didn't do as good of a job.
The cutscenes look great and so do the backgrounds, but the sprites are really small and basic. Even with their size, they could still look better.
Okay, and both games commit that cardinal sin of 16-bit game design. You know the one I'm talking about, because you know I've bitched about it before. Shit in the foreground. There's shit in the foreground in both of these games.
Ah, what the fuck? What is all this garbage in front of the action? I can't see what the fuck I'm doing!
Ugh. Alright, anyways, last stop. sound. The Genesis sound is good for Genesis sound, but the Genesis sound chip was just an FM synthesis, and it's not exactly known for it being a powerhouse. The SNES sound chip, on the other hand, of course, is known for being a powerhouse, and while the sound certainly is better in the Super Nintendo game, it's still not very good or interesting. I don't know. Take a listen.
Yeah. All right. That was cool. Yeah.
All right, let's be done with this cavalcade of bullshit, shall we? Jesus, I mean, games also came out on the Game Gear the same year, and the Game Boy 4 years later. I'm just glad I didn't touch those at all. There's also an unreleased arcade game of the same name that was made by Atari Games but never finished. There are playable prototypes though, and they appear at the California Extreme Retro Arcade Show every year, so check them out if you're in the area, I guess. Alright, so this is the part where I'm supposed to give the edge. Honestly though, unless you have some sort of rampant Beavis and Butt-Head nostalgia, neither one of these games is any good. I mean, I guess, in the name of being consistent, I'll go ahead and say the Genesis one is better, but again, neither one is any great shakes. Although, if you do want to check them out, they're both really cheap, a couple bucks on eBay at most. Well, that's all I got for you this time. I promise you guys good games in the next episode, and make sure you check out in the interim onthestick.com for all of our normal wackiness and podcasts there, and we'll see you next time.